I would find it really hard not to finish my glass before we started tasting.
I have started. I don't know how many people have actually had Austrian wines before, or Grüner Veltliner before, and I can see a few hands going up. In fact, Tessa and Ian, I know you've actually, apart from Austrian wines, you've actually already visited Ridgeback. So I don't know, there's certainly a couple in the room who've been to your farm in the last few years. But anyway, more of that later. So I'm going back to 1985 when I was at Victoria Wine and Grants at St James's, and we were bottling wines in Guildford, and tankers of wines were coming in, and we had all sorts of really interesting wines. I think, dare say, a bit ahead of our time in those days, because we had a really nice white wine from Austria. And I can't remember, it's the region, in my mind it's called a Frankensteiner, but I guess it wouldn't have been called that, because that just is just a monster that makes me think of that. There must be a anyway, something that sounds a bit like Frankenstein. And we had two 20,000 litre tanks coming in, and they were just about to be unloaded the day the headlines in 1985 sort of antifreeze scandal. I don't know if you remember that. Back in 1985, the great Austrian antifreeze scandal hit, and basically some various people had been adulterating Austrian wine with diethylene glycol, which is a component part of antifreeze. And the reason why they were doing it was because back then, and for a bit longer, I know this because we were buying sort of lots and lots of German wines. It was all Liefraumilch and Hock and Piesporter and Niersteiner Gutes Domtar, and they were all dirt cheap, and they were the biggest. I mean, German wines, I think the French wines had about 40% of the market. Germany came a close second with 30% of the market, because we were drinking, that's just in the UK, we were drinking lots of these sweet white wines. And of course, like any commodity, producers are under pressure to reduce the price, because the nasty retailers are always putting pressure on them to get cheaper and cheaper, or sort of squeezing margins. So and you've got these, we saw last week, we had a look at that Noble Rot. We saw the grapes with Noble Rot on it for the Morillon. Well, if you go to Germany and you have a Spätlese or an Auslese, they've got a similar sort of thing going on there. That's the rotten grapes enhance the sweetness and make it quite an expensive wine. If you take a cheap wine and add diethylene glycol to it, it actually has a lot of, it turns the wine really fat and sweet. And it's a cheap way of sort of trying to disguise something. The downside was you potentially die from it, and that's what happened. So hit the headlines. They did have fatalities from people who were drinking this Austrian wine that had been diluted, and it had been diluted. Austrian wine had been diluted with this stuff to be sent into Germany to blend with cheap German wines. So it was a complete and utter mess. And we had 40,000 litres of the stuff just arrived, which we tested, and it had zero. It didn't have anything, but it killed the Austrian market stone dead in 1985, and it took decades to recover. We managed to blend it away. So instead of selling it as an Austrian wine, we blended it with some bit of Italian, a bit of French, and a bit of German, and called it a European blend. And it hit the Victoria wine shops, and it sold very successfully. Actually, it was very nice, and it was perfectly legal, and no contamination whatsoever. But we managed to sort of avert a disaster of chucking away 40,000 litres. Mm-hmm. Since then, so the Austrian wine, they had to refocus, had to reinvent themselves. So they've gone away from the sweet styles, they've gone away from mass market, and they've gone towards small, independent, small estate producers, such as, actually, I dare say, epitomised by Herbert and Carmen Zillinger with their wines. And if you have let's have a sniff. These wines, the colour. This is 2016, and it's interesting because. So we have another sniff. What are you getting? There's sweetness and acidity, which you can't necessarily smell, but I'm getting sort of spiciness and pepper on there. And when you taste it, there's definitely acidity. It's a good acidity, which is what you'd expect. basically cool climate wines, and high acidity generally needs to be balanced out in white wines with a sort of slightly higher sugar. Which is what German wines are, and then we've even got some English wines. They have quite high acidity, and they've got slightly sort of hint of sugar, which balances that out. But it makes it a really sort of lovely sort of spicy, peppery. I don't know what other people's tasting notes are coming through with, but this is a really good, crisp but quite rich style of wine. 2016. When we first went there, we were tasting wines. It was in sort of February time. We were tasting the new wine, and we were tasting the year-old wine, which were delicious. And they said, but we sold out of the year-old wine. You've got to buy the brand new wine. And the thing about Austrian wines, they definitely improve with a bit of age. And so we ended up buying the young wine, and it actually wasn't at its best. It needed time to improve, and at least a year. And we've had this one now for 2 years, and I think it's actually even better now than it was sort of possibly even 2 years ago. Sad fact about this one, I'm afraid. The very last bottles of our Herbert Zillinger wine went to you folk out there for your taster case. So we are just in the process of reordering more stock from them, but that's going to be some time away. So, but it is on its way. Now, Jancis Robinson has written up these people. Jancis is, if you like, the British guru wine journalist. She has basically said that she can't understand why nobody else, they've got no importers in America, and we're the only people who've shipped them to the UK. And her sort of tasting note on them, on the winery is masterful. And it's just a really lovely style of white, unoaked. It's zingy, but it's quite rich and soft. It's got some acidity to it.
We get some commentary of what, just in the notes of what other people are smelling, tasting.
What are we getting?
Tangy. We've got apple or pear.
Apples and pears, that's sort of apples certainly, like, and tangy. Those are all sort of words that suggest the acidity to me. And pears, obviously, with sort of like pear drops, that's coming through with some lovely acidity. I just think these are very, very interesting wines. One of the wines that they've got a single vineyard which we're about to ship, which will be here later this year. If you'd asked me, well, even 5 years ago, can you sell Austrian wines? I'd have said not really. I don't think there's enough knowledge about what they are. But we did ship them, and they get well written up. The wine journalists support you if they like the wines, and they have been well received. One wine that is it's a 2017 vintage, so it's already 3 years old. Jancis Robinson's tasting notes are that it's not even ready until 2022, and then it'll be at its peak in about 2025, 26. And that's saying something for an Austrian wine. That shows it's got some aging capability. Mind you, it's going to be a £35 bottle, so it should be good at that price. But when it comes in, who knows? We might all try and have a bottle in one of our.
And how much is this one a bottle, Mark?
This one's £14 at the moment.
This compared to the load you've got coming.
But yes, enjoy it while you can, because as I say, we don't have a single bottle left in stock until we have new stock, and the new stock vintage will be the 2019 vintage. So it'll be 3 years younger than this, and as I say, it will take some time to age.
Mark, what would you recommend we eat this with? How would you serve it?
Well, I'd serve it. I've got mine quite cold. We talked about that last time. I think it's about sort of 8 to 9 degrees. I think because it's quite rich and fat, it should be not quite as cold as something that doesn't have that sort of richness. I think the richer it is, the slightly warmer it can be, the slightly less cold it can be. In terms of eating with it, I definitely think it's that spiciness to me that makes it good with quite spicy foods, and that sort of mouthfeel. It coats the inside of your mouth with sort of quite rich, sort of almost oiliness, and to me that would make it good with Thai food, as well as any good old barbecue, any barbecue this summer.